Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm Katie Sudoreiko, the Territorial Director of a new initiative that the GNWT is undertaking called Integrated Service Delivery. And I'm here today to explain to you kind of what ISD is, what I'll call it. ISD is, what's involved in this new planning, why the GNWT is moving that way, and the current status of where we're at in kind of embarking on this new initiative. So next slide, please. So the overall goal, and this has been kind of talked about today, the overall goal and desired outcome of ISD is really to change the way service delivery across the NWT is happening so that it results in more positive outcomes for people that are accessing services. So that would be both in their experience in accessing these services, but also in kind of related socioeconomic outcomes. So better health outcomes, more stable housing, those things. Also, we're looking at increased efficiencies and then increased well-being among frontline staff as well, particularly in results of the pandemic. You're hearing about a lot of burnout on frontline staff, and so that's a concern. But there are really three foundational concepts that I want to just touch on in order to really understand that this is the kind of largeness of this initiative. So the most important message that I want to get across today is that this isn't a program. It's an initiative that's going to create mechanisms and structures that are going to allow all of the programs that we have, and we know that there are many, to work together better to meet the needs of NWT residents better. So this initiative is going to formally integrate current programs that we have and new programs that are going to come up, or when programs change, with the overall goal of enhancing system capacity so that we can respond to residents' needs more timely, more effective, and more integrated. Because the topic of today is homelessness. We know that that's not just a housing thing. It involves health, it involves income. We can talk about seniors. There's many things that we can talk about when we talk about homelessness. And so we know that we need to work together better to ensure that we're looking at the whole person. So this change in the way we do business at the GNWT is going to really require a shift in the culture of service delivery and a commitment to really do things differently so that we're not kind of still just working in our silos. And so for this to be successful, we really do have to take a whole of government approach. So that's the second point. And this means having commitment from leadership to move in this direction really as one unit with a common goal, and ensure that the changes that we need to make to how we work are actually done so that this can be successful. So this means multi-level processes to reduce the inequities that we sometimes see across service provision, and creating a system that's really focused on the root cause of some of the social issues that we face, really going upstream. Homelessness, when people are in shelter, that's the end. We want to kind of go back and say, what were the steps or what were the things that led to this person losing their home? And the last one is that a foundational piece of moving toward this integrated service delivery method is that we all need to take a common approach with our service delivery, which is really a person-centered approach or a family-centered approach, that person is really at the center of how we do all of our business. Next slide, please. So just quickly want to touch on what I mean by a whole of government approach. And so really that means that the government and all of the departments that are involved in a specific issue, so homelessness is our issue for these couple of days, has a clear shared strategic priority from what the government's going to do, political commitments on how we think we're going to get there, leaders within the GNWT to make this collaboration happen, and incentives for people to do the work. So we need to be clear on what we're doing, what's required to be successful at the outset, because if we don't, we know that what's going to happen when we try to do work is that suddenly all of the challenges of working interdepartmentally will happen and we'll fall back into our silos. So from the start, we need the get-go that we know the system's fragmented and we're willing to put in the work to work differently to make this happen. And I want to stress that we have a lot of wonderful interagency groups and interdepartmental working groups that come together to problem solve and do this stuff. But a whole of government approach is different from that. It's really making shared commitments at the top rather than trying to kind of just do interdepartmental work. It's about shared decision-making and shared accountability so that everybody is on the table when we're looking at homelessness. We all have a piece of this and we all have a shared accountability to kind of improve the outcomes that we're trying to do. And so that's a really different approach to just, an interagency group that comes together sometimes in good faith or sometimes because of the people that are at the table. Next slide, please. So person-centered service delivery, I'm sure you're all aware of what this is. It could be community-centered, family-centered. It's basically a philosophy that works from principles of equity. We heard this morning from Eleanor about, treating those who need the most. That's what equity is. It's not about treating everyone the same. We know that we don't all start from the same place. And so we need to focus on who needs things the most, who's the most at need. And so a person-centered approach takes that as one of its founding principles. Dignity, respect, looking at the strengths that people bring, being flexible. We've heard that this morning. Things need to be more flexible. There's not one model that's going to fit in every community. So we need to be flexible and agile in how we're going to do this. People need to be accountable, and we need to have coordination among frontline service providers. So we're just explicitly considering the individual's whole context. We're not compartmentalizing their needs, how our departments are set up. We're really taking the whole approach to them and their capacity to really access services, because everyone also is going to have a different capacity. At one of the tables I sat at this morning, there was talk about not everybody has access to the internet. So just because everything's listed on the internet doesn't mean people are going to be able to find things that way. So there's a range of things in how we kind of determine what a strength-based approach is and understanding people's capacity. So person-centered is really about moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach, because we know all of our communities are very different, and we know that one-size-fits-all approach hasn't worked. Next slide, please. So this is, why is the GNWT moving this way? So, despite significant investment by the GNWT in many areas related to positive social and health outcomes, unfortunately, the NWT continues to be represented in a jurisdiction that's kind of struggling to meet the needs of their residents for many reasons. And the GNWT acknowledges and has heard from communities and residents that the service system that we currently have can be confusing, it can be difficult to navigate, especially when residents are needing to access more than one services. I also heard from someone today, it took a week to figure out who they needed to talk to get something done. And that's just not an effective service, and nor is it really serving our residents well. We've also heard through engagements that services often don't reflect the actual needs that residents have. And NWT residents have been clear through years and years of engagement with the GNWT that they require culturally safe, person-centered, strength-based care and support from the GNWT services that we have, and that unfortunately, services aren't often experienced that way. So we've also heard, aspects of, stigma, racism, and colonial attitudes continue to be reflected in our very fragmented and confusing service experience. And that services are really right now set up just to address one problem at a time. So you're at housing to address homelessness, and then you go to income to address your income, and then you go to health to address your health. But really, you're a whole individual, and all of those things play into each other. And we know that the healthy outcome is kind of addressing those all as the whole person. And maybe our services aren't really set up right now to do that. So in acknowledging all of these issues, ISD initiative is aiming, as I stated, to create a new way of doing business and delivering services to ensure that we can have, positive lifespan development from, prenatal all the way to seniors care. So people have they can thrive, individuals can thrive, and families can thrive, while also committing to a process of reconciliation, and also recognizing the principles of self-determination for Indigenous peoples in the territory. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a slide to kind of visualize the process that this is going to take in order to really change the way we do business. So it's a cross-government initiative. I sit within the Department of Justice right now, but it is really an initiative that involves all of mostly the child and family or the social envelope departments. So in the kind of concentric circles diagram there, it outlines kind of three major things that ISD is going to have to do to kind of help everything fit together. So if you start at the center in kind of the pink, I guess it is, these are all of the current programs and services that we have, and any ones that might be developed in the future. So the goal of ISD, as I stated, is to create mechanisms and structures to formally have these programs and services work together better. So ISD isn't going to replace any programs. It's not a new program itself. It's not going to derail programs that are going through their own efforts on the ground or undergoing changes. It's working to identify what's needed to allow these programs to actually work together. So we've heard today a couple of things about, people not being able to get out from behind their desk is often a barrier that we hear about services. So how is it, and what do we need to change so that these programs can, maybe two programs, one from health and one from housing, can go together somewhere, meet someone where they're at, hear the issues, and, address the program. So those are kind of like the mechanisms about having all of these programs work together better. And then the yellow is training, or what I talked about earlier as kind of this cultural shift towards this person-centered service delivery aspect. So if we want to go this way, everyone kind of has to agree that that's how we're going to approach service delivery. All the frontline service providers across all the departments kind of need to agree that these principles are what's important, and that's how we're going to move forward. And so that's going to take training amongst like all government staff, because otherwise what's going to happen is we know that when people go to different program areas, they'll get treated differently or they'll have different values. And then that's where you see barriers start to happen. People say, well, I went to here and was treated this way, and I went here and was treated this way. So we really need to have that common training and that common approach so that, people like to say, like, there's no wrong door. You can go anywhere to get these services and you know that you'll be supported. And then the green is the kind of actual integration piece, is how I kind of like to describe it. So those are those mechanisms, and it's on the outermost edge of the circle because we need to change some of the structures. We need to change, policies that we're allowed to do at work, like leaving our office and going to meet someone in the community. Like that could be a policy. It's not necessarily the individual that doesn't want to do that, but the policy that was set up, who knows, maybe 30 years ago, is stopping them from actually doing that kind of work. So those are the pieces that we need to look at to say, what kind of structures and supports do staff at the frontline need in order to enable them to work this way. But the tangible goal is, the change at the service delivery level for all NWT residents, and that those social and health economic or social health and social health and socioeconomic outcomes that we're looking to achieve there. But one point that I want to make really clear is there's been a lot of integration efforts across the GNWT for, I've looked into it, up to 20 years. I've found efforts where people are trying to do this. This isn't a new idea by any means. But the issue, I think, is that they all try to start at the pink. They all try to start at the program area. And eventually, they all hit similar barriers where there's these larger structural things that stop them from actually working in an integrated way. And, not to say that the programs haven't been effective, they have been to a degree, but if we're really looking at creating something that's sustainable, we need to really take a structured approach to change in how the GNWT does business. So next slide, please. So who will be involved? So it's a fairly new initiative right now. It was decided that it would be started by the child and family departments, or the old social envelope departments, for those of you that are still using that language. So that's education, culture, and employment, justice, housing, health, MACA, finance, and EIA. Executive Indigenous Affairs. So those deputy ministers are the ones who are kind of heading this initiative at the moment. But we know that as it develops, it's likely that more government departments will come online. It's just hard to boil the whole ocean, so we're trying to start a little bit smaller. It's still very new. So right now only government's involved, but we completely understand for this to be successful, it has to include intersectoral integration and very strong partnerships. So to meet the long-term goals of integration, we are going to have meaningful engagement with Indigenous partners, NGOs, RCMP, municipal partners, and how all of these people are going to start being engaged in the development of this initiative is currently in its planning stage. What's also really crucial is that we include people with lived expertise in using the service system. So in understanding things that need to change and the barriers that we face, we basically need to hear this straight from the people that are, accessing the services and having difficulties in accessing the services, because that's going to be our opportunity to feed into the structural changes that we need to see for service transformation. Next slide, please. This is just to say that, as I already stated, ISD is not new. It's not new to the GNWT. It's not new to the world. Across the globe, people have recognized that our systems are fragmented. They don't support people in the best ways or the most efficient ways. And so these are just some examples of areas that have already done integration at this level to some degree. And if you look into a lot of the examples, you see a lot of integration that happens just specifically within the health department, because if you imagine how huge health is, and if you think in like a much larger jurisdiction than ours, so let's say, Toronto, if you could just manage to integrate health alone, you'd probably be very successful. But up here, we're being a little bit more innovative perhaps, and we're gonna attempt to integrate those social envelope departments, because we realize that the interconnectedness of all of those services is extremely important. Next slide, please. So the current status of this initiative within the GNWT. So although the GNWT has been discussing this concept and researching it and attempting it at the program level for, well over a decade, this process that I'm sharing with you today only became formalized as something that the GNWT wants to commit to doing in August 2020. And that's when those 7 deputy ministers signed an MOU committing to moving forward with this. And there you see kind of the commitments that were outlined in the MOU. And basically the MOU really acknowledges that there needs to be a very strategic, systematic, structural change across governments in order for us to work this way and if we want it to be successful. Next slide, please. What also came out of the signing of that MOU was a territorial senior management committee of change leaders. So this is directors from all of those departments that have been appointed by their deputies to lead this work. So it's not a justice thing. I sit in justice and kind of facilitating the process going through, but the importance of having all of those partners at the table is crucial, or else the initiative just, it won't happen. There's a conceptual framework that's been developed, which is going to guide our planning of the initiative. We are creating some other foundational documents to use in the engagement and co-development process. So that's kind of like a vision and a mission and what exactly this is going to mean. And we're also going through a process of figuring out what that engagement process is going to be. One side kind of project that's coming out of the ISD initiative right now is work on a common set of social and well-being indicators. So there has been some mention of data and recently about, we need to use data to get things. And unfortunately, that is the reality. If we can't substantiate like what we're doing and if it's working, it's difficult for us to get additional funding to do things. So we're creating a common set of social and well-being indicators that can kind of give us a benchmark of where residents are. And these aren't specific to one department, but will be able to be accessed by those 7 departments that are a partner in this. And hopefully we can use these to track change over time. So unfortunately, it takes a little bit of time for these changes to occur. So we're not going to see them in a year. But the idea is if our population well-being is getting better and we can connect that in some way to the way we're delivering services, then we can say that, you know, ISD is successful. Alternatively, if we've changed some structural things and these outcomes that we're hoping to see aren't being achieved, then we need to reassess and be agile and flexible to say, maybe we didn't get the right thing. We need to readjust again because we're still not seeing the kind of outcomes for residents, which is the main goal. We're also working currently with a consultant who did an integration assessment on our group. So those kind of 7 departments. And it's given the GNWT an understanding of the evidence-based practices that are required to do integration work. So these folks are integration experts that have worked across Canada and internationally, helping systems integrate better. And this outcome from this integration assessment is going to give us a benchmark for the GNWT to say, here's kind of where you're at in regards to integration. These are the challenges you're probably going to face because of the way you're structured and some roadblocks. And here's a way that you might be able to move forward with an initiative. So I know this sounds like a lot of planning. It is, it's a very large initiative. But while this planning occurs, it's important for everyone to be aware that this ISD team is also very actively involved in on-the-ground issues of identifying system barriers to service delivery that residents face. So the integrated case management program still continues to collect kind of barriers that are faced every day by folks accessing the system. And this feeds up to this group where we discuss it. And these are how we're getting the ideas about some of the things that need to change in order for this transformation of the service system to actually be successful. Next slide. So that's it. I'm 2 minutes over. So in closing, I just want to say that I'm not standing up here saying this is going to be something that we'll be able to do in 2 years and everything will be better. It's definitely not an easy endeavor and it's definitely not fast, but it's required and worthwhile. And, you know, it's a little bit like turning the Titanic, but we realize that if we want to move forward and really change the outcomes that we're seeing and support residents in a different way, then this is the way that we have to go. So thank you for your time. If you have questions, you can contact me.